Welcome to today's video. The topic that I'd like to cover this week is what we can call reconciling ideas about being present that are taught in yoga and how we also still live with goals or long-term aims in our life. So one of the questions that often seems to come up in discussions is around the idea, well, if I'm present all the time and if my focus is simply just to be present in the moment, how do I get anywhere in life? How do I achieve anything? How do I sustain and maintain movement towards longer term goals? So let's break this down a little bit and see what we can understand and actually see how these two things align very nicely, even though on the surface they appear to be somewhat paradoxical. So the first thing I think we can look at is what is presence? And presence, of course, this is a big topic, but simply put for today's session, what we can say is presence is our ability to be fully in the moment and to notice what is arising in the moment. Perhaps we might say without the clouding of the mind being engaged in the past or the mind being engaged in the future. In other words, what we can say is that when there are thoughts going through our mind, those thoughts actually can become a barrier, or generally are a barrier, to our ability to be in the present moment. Whenever there are thoughts in our mind, we are responding to our conditioning, and we are responding in that moment to our previous experiences, which means that when we come to look at something, when we come to look at an object, when we come to try to understand a circumstance that is unfolding around us, we are looking at it through the lens of everything that we have experienced previously. Now, some of us may say, well, actually, that's a good thing because we need experience in order to know what's truly going on in the moment. For example, like a child is gradually educated and learns words and ways of relating to the world so that the child and then the adult can function more efficiently in the world. So we may say, well, what's wrong with that? Well, the challenge is that yes, in some circumstances and in many situations, previous knowledge helps to define what we might expect of a situation. However, we must see, unfortunately or fortunately, at the same time, that education creates a limitation in the way that we perceive things that are arising in front of us in that particular moment. So the practice of presence, and the reason that importance is placed upon it, is because many of the Eastern practices, philosophies, darshans, essentially say, as long as your mind is active, as long as there are thoughts, as long as there is previous conditioning, you're not actually seeing things clearly. You are only seeing things through a limited and relative perspective. So therefore, by practicing presence, we come to know what is going on around us more fully and clearly, and we also come to know ourselves better because we can look into ourselves. We can notice, for example, in the yogic sense, sensations, we can notice breath, we can even observe from a deeper place our thought patterns, and we can begin to know ourselves better by being present and having tools and methodologies to bring ourselves into the present moment. Now, if you follow that logically through to the next stage, what that's saying is that when we are fully present and when we are divorced from the attachment to the future and divorced from the attachment to the past, what that essentially allows us to do is to see more clearly. And when we see more clearly, we can act with more efficiency. We can act in a way that is more what we might call error-free. And therefore, we are able to engage in the task that we are undertaking in that moment more fully, more completely, and perhaps more efficiently, we might say, for a better outcome. So, for example, if you imagine trying to write an essay or write a poem or draw a picture or do any kind of work task, for example, and the phone is constantly going and the doorbell is ringing and you're thinking about lunch and you're thinking about things you have to do later, It's not to say that you can't get the task done, but we can already see perhaps just from the few minutes that we've been together today that that might not be the optimum state for us to be in. And so therefore, one of the what you might call the byproducts or the side effects of practicing yoga and constantly practicing bringing our mind back into the present moment is that it gives us the ability to create a pattern in our mind that stabilizes our attention in one direction. And therefore, if we choose presence to be the object of our practice, for example, coming into presence, we gradually find that we can stay more present and more committed to the object into which we are directing our attention, for example, the task that we just talked about. Now, what that means in the context of our theme today is that everything we do with presence can be done better, essentially. Now, let's just take a moment and look at what that means in terms of goals. Now, yoga doesn't say don't set goals. Yoga actually says, live your life fully. Set goals if you like, but just be wary of the expectation and the attachment that you have to those goals. So it kind of says, okay, have goals, but realize that ultimately you're not truly in control of whether the fruit of those goals arises in the way that you had imagined, anticipated, or hoped for in the first place. So that's the first part. Have goals, but hold them gently, hold them mindfully, hold them in a way which understands the nature of existence, which is that really we don't have that much control at all over the external world. And therefore, when we interact with the external world and expect things from it, it's not always, often in many cases, likely to come out in the way that we anticipated. So have goals, but hold them lightly, a little bit of detachment, a little bit of understanding that we can't control really the outcome of our actions to any great degree. So that's one side of the conundrum of setting goals. But equally, can we see now perhaps that if we set a goal and we hold it lightly, as we've just talked about, but then we practice presence. Now, what does that mean? It means that as we work towards that goal lightly and gently, we bring ourselves fully into the moment every single day, every single minute, every single second, without distraction and letting the mind not go into many, many different places. We can work more efficiently, we can work more fully and completely, and we can devote ourselves more fully to the task in hand. And the result of that devotion is that we can really say that we are doing our best. Because really, what does it mean to do our best? It doesn't mean to kill ourselves or to push so hard that it depletes our energy and causes us physiological and emotional and psychological imbalances. What it means to do our best is just to give our all in the moment, to be fully present with that task at hand. And what we learn from yoga is that if we can be present in every moment and we can give our fullest in this sense of being present, then everything else will take care of itself. We don't need to worry about the future because we're holding the future lightly, as we talked about, with a little bit of detachment, understanding that yes, we can work towards a goal, but can we practice receiving the results of all of our actions with mental equanimity, regardless of whether they turn out to be as we would like them to be or in some kind of different way. So we can begin to see that presence actually helps us to have more of a chance of achieving our goals, whilst at the same time the detachment that is required in order to cultivate presence allows us also to hold the goals that we might hold in the long term for our lives, for our relatives, for our children, for our friends, lightly, understanding that there is only so much we can do. And I think what we find, just to finish, with all of the great spiritual traditions is that on the surface, it appears that some of these teachings are paradoxical. It appears, well, hang on a minute, how can I have goals and be present at the same time? But generally, if we see a paradox, it means that we haven't necessarily penetrated deep enough into the teaching to understand that both things can be held side by side if we're maintaining the integrity of the practice, which is this gentle, full presence in the moment, alongside goals which are skillfully crafted, that are not above and beyond our means, but also are held in a regard which understands I am not in control. So please do reflect on this, friends, and thank you once again for watching this video. Take care. Namaste.